You know, parathas and breads, Indian regional breads, take so much expertise, and I don't really have that. But what I do have is sort of like a competence. Like, I'm competent is what I'd say. But competency is also delicious. So I'm sharing these recipes with you in the hope that you'll be able to, become competent as well. So I've experimented a lot with flours, and for this particular flaky paratha recipe, and it's a little bit, like I said, it's a little bit of a cheats paratha, it's quite quick. The key is the mix of flours. So with just like a plain flour, it's too empty. So plain flour generally works as a carrier of flavor. So I use a mix of plain flour, so 2/3 plain flour, 1/3 atta flour. Atta flour has this beautiful like glutinous or gluten content that allows for a little bit of stretch, and a nutty character that's carried by the plain flour, but the openness in the plain flour allows the salt and the ghee that I use in this to really shine through. If I use 100% atta flour, the end result's a little bit heavy, and you lose that sort of that sweet saltiness that comes from that salt ghee combination. So I'm gonna ad-lib this, but it's 1.5 cups, I'll say, of plain flour. As always, I use a really good quality plain flour, or just generally. So this is Eden Valley, which is a West Australian mill, and they have biodynamic flours, and they're really beautiful expressions of their categories. And then I'm gonna use 1/2 cup of atta flour. And mix those two together. Over there. Our salt is key. So triplicate of salts. So a fine pink salt, a fine white sea salt, and a fleur de sel, or a flaked salt. And they will all have a slightly different impact. The pink salt is sweeter with a longer last and a mineral quality. The sea salt is quite linear and driving with an oceanic quality. And the flaked salt is kind of ballistically explosive and effervescent with quite a blunt quality. So those three will work together to create a sodium infrastructure in the dough, which is part of the deliciousness of the experience. So I'm going to say 1/3 cup of flaked salt, a teaspoon and 1/3 of white sea salt, and 2/3 of a teaspoon of the fine pink salt. Yes, it's a lot of salt, but I love salty flaky bread. So what can I say? It's the reason I scaffold the salts or use more than one. If I used, that quantity in a singular salt, it would sit incredibly heavy. The sodium drive would be very dominant. But with those 3 salts, anyone who's ever watched any of my videos on scaffolding, what you get is dispersal of sodium. Each of those salts hits the palate in a slightly different spot and causes a different palate sensation or stimulus. The mouth then reads like looking, it casts its gaze from salt to salt, sort of never sitting on one for too long, but kind of skipping between 1, 2, 3. And so the complexity of sodium drive is there, but there's not that heavy, like stagnant experience of sodium. That's how it works. All right, so tablespoon of ghee to start. Now notice I said to start because ghee gets repeated through this process. Just gonna put some hot water to it. I say this every time I make any sort of, roti, puri, paratha, samosa, anything that I'm making this sort of dough. Warm water will stop the dough from tensing. And then Notice how I have the bowl so I can move it away from the water stream when I need to. So this is a feel thing. Dough is always a feel thing. Cooking is a feel thing. Life is a feel thing, as it turns out. I feel like I'm finally getting a little bit better at it. Life, that is, not dough. Dough I still pretty much suck at, but. All right. I think that's gonna do. So come over with me to the bench. And I am going to. Now, if you want these to be extra fluffy, you can put a little bit of baking powder in them and maybe a little bit of sugar and leave them to sit and rise for a moment, which I will do anyway. I will leave it to rest because leaving it to rest for a fraction of time does soften, you know, it's like the proteins do actually soften through a little bit. I'm just giving it a bit of a knead, nothing too serious. Like I said, I am an amateur in this regard. Just feels nice. And it does change, like you feel it change texture as you bring it together, which is nice. I'm going to break these into even parts. Set it aside from that. Okay, put them on a little tally. And just let them rest. And come back to them. Yummy. It's delicious just like that. Okay, so they've rested for a little bit, and after resting, they're softer and they're more pliant, which is what we want. Now, I did put my flour away, so let me just get the atta flour back. So the process of doing this is actually very kind of pretty basic. So actually I don't put any flour down first, and what I'm doing is this is a first pass. So I just want to roll the dough out till it's sort of quite thin. You know, can be round but doesn't hugely matter. And then what I'm going to do, so quite thin being, you know, well, like chapati thin. So there's no big chunks in the middle and it's spread out across the table. So ghee in the middle with a knife. With a knife, you're just slicing a space and then rolling it off the bench. And then you make a little rose. So you sort of squish it down to a little rose shape, like so. You see all the ghee coming out of it already. So let me clean that, because it's going to stick to the other one. Might just put a bit of flour down so it rolls a fraction either. So next one. So I just sort of squash it flat a little bit. Leave that fraction out of the way. Do this for all of them. So it's like a pastry. You're essentially like I guess if you were making a flaky pastry, puff pastry, like that. And then you just squash it until you've got that pretty little rose shape. And all of those folds in that rose shape, when you roll it out again, are where the flake come from. Now when you do this, you can actually do this multiple times. So when I have time, and if I'm home in the day working, and I want to have really yummy flaky paratha for dinner, then I'll make them in the afternoon. I'll do this process once, set them in the fridge for an hour or so, and do it again. So roll them out again, another layer of ghee and another floral curl. And I think I would like to try one day doing it like 3 or 4 times and seeing where it gets me. I haven't yet found the time for that, but if you find the time to do that and have a go at it, let me know how it turns out, because I'd be interested to hear. Okay, so that's it. Now, you could refrigerate these, and you can see it's like it's a warm day here, so the ghee is running, but I am just going to make them because, you know, got a lot of filming to get through today. So, to roll them out, you do need a little bit of flour on the surface, because they do have ghee in them and they will stick, and I don't want them to. So see, as I'm rolling out, what you'll notice is the lines in the dough, and that's where the sort of that folding creates a little bit of a layer structure, and that's where the flakiness comes from. I always roll my most distressed looking chapati when Travis has his camera rolling, like without fail. Okay, so I'll roll out a bunch. I've just got my like grill on, heating up. I make these as after school snacks sometimes for the boys too. So ghee again, believe it or not. So a little bit of ghee, and then I'm going to walk it over to my hot plate, and then a little bit of ghee on the reverse. See how they're puffing a little bit? Yum, yum. Easy, flaky, cheats paratha, I guess. Do you want me to put them somehow more beautifully? Like a little fan. Look at that. It's the food stylist in me.